Today we are going to explore an uncomfortable truth about one of the foods most present on our tables, bacon. We are going to discover what the food industry hides about processed meat and how ancestral preservation techniques far surpassed modern methods. Before continuing with the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more documentary narratives like this one. It was an ordinary morning in some kitchen of the Western world. A package of bacon rested on the counter. It had been bought only 6 days before, but something was wrong. Upon opening the package, an acidic and chemical smell escaped. The edges of the meat presented a grayish coloration, and to the touch a viscous texture revealed itself under the fingers. On the 7th day, that bacon would be discarded in the trash, like so many others before it. This scenario, repeated millions of times around the planet, raises a fundamental question about the nature of the foods we consume in the modern era. To understand what happens with the industrialized meat of today, it is necessary to go back in time. Not decades, but centuries. Let us imagine the year 1547 on a rural property in the Austrian mountains. A farmer had just slaughtered a pig. In the following weeks, he would salt the meat, smoke the cuts in a wooden shed using beech firewood, and hang the hams in his cool and dry cellar. 16 months later, on Easter morning, his family would cut slices of that same ham. The meat would not only be safe for consumption, its flavor would have deepened and improved with time. What did that medieval farmer, armed only with an axe and a pile of firewood, know that modern supermarkets seem to have forgotten? This question leads us on a journey through time and science, revealing secrets that the food industry would prefer to keep hidden. The history of meat preservation dates back to immemorial times. Scholars speculate that Neanderthals, who inhabited the Earth between 40,000 and 400,000 years ago, already dried meat as a way to preserve it. Researchers suggest that, to transport large carcasses after the hunt, these human ancestors could have employed techniques similar to those used later by hunter-gatherer peoples in Africa and by the original peoples of the Americas, drying the meat at the site of the slaughter and carrying it across poles. The oldest records of meat preservation with salt date back to approximately 3,000 years before Christ, when the Sumerians in Mesopotamia preserved cooked meats and fish in sesame oil and salt. Around 900 years before Christ, the Greeks already produced so-called salt gardens, using the harvested mineral to dry and smoke fish. The Romans, around 200 years before Christ, learned from the Greeks to use salt for preservation and expanded the technique to various types of meat, including pork. It was at this time that the reddening effect of salt on meat was documented for the first time. In medieval Europe, the treatment of meat with salt, saltpeter, and smoke became common practice. Monasteries functioned as centers of culinary innovation, with monks experimenting with various herbs and spices to improve the flavor of cured meats. During the 12th century, salted beef was consumed by all social classes. Smoked meat received specific names in Romance languages, and when it came to pork, it was called bacon. But let us return to the present. Take a package of supermarket bacon and examine the list of ingredients. There will be listed water, not the natural moisture of the meat itself, but water added deliberately. Industrial processors inject the bacon with salt water using machines equipped with dozens of needles. This process is termed enhancement or improvement by the industry, but in essence, it represents something quite different. A modern piece of bacon can contain between 15 and 25% added water. When someone buys a package of bacon, they are paying the price of meat for tap water mixed with phosphates and salt. To scale the economic impact of this practice, let us consider the numbers. If a package of bacon costs the equivalent of $10, approximately $2 of that value corresponds to water. Multiplying this by the scale of consumption of an entire country, families collectively lose billions in purchases of water labeled as food. But the problem goes far beyond wasted money. There is a scientific concept called water activity, represented by the acronym AW. This parameter measures how much water is available in a food for bacterial use. The scale goes from 0 to 1, where pure water corresponds to the value of 1. Fresh raw meat presents water activity around 0.98 or 0.99. This number indicates a paradise for microorganisms. Salmonella cannot develop below 0.95. Escherichia coli also ceases its growth at this level. Listeria, the bacterium responsible for dozens of annual deaths, needs a water activity of 0.92 or higher to prosper. Modern bacon, inflated with added water to increase profits, presents water activity between 0.96 and 0.97. This is a perfect environment for bacterial proliferation, wrapped in plastic and kept under precarious refrigeration. In contrast, medieval bacon, after weeks of salting and smoking, reached water activity between 0.85 and 0.88. At this level, practically nothing survives, neither bacteria, nor fungi, nor yeasts. The meat became chemically hostile to life. It did not need refrigeration because there was simply nothing left for the microbes to consume. The situation worsens when we examine the composition of the injected water. It is not pure. It contains sodium phosphate, a chemical compound that makes muscle fibers swell and retain more liquid. When modern bacon is placed in the frying pan, a revealing phenomenon is observed. A white foam bubbles and drains into the pan. That is the added water escaping, carrying with it dissolved proteins and chemical additives. The bacon shrinks dramatically, sometimes losing 30% of its original volume. The consumer is not cooking bacon. They are boiling injected meat in its own chemical bath. The industry has known this reality since the 1950s, when mechanical injection became standard in production processes. Before that, bacon was cured the old-fashioned way, rubbed with salt, left to rest for weeks, and smoked. During this process, it lost about 25% of its weight. This loss represented a cost for producers, so the industry found a solution that not only stopped the weight loss, but allowed for the addition of extra weight. A preservation method was transformed into a profit method, and the health of consumers became the price to pay. There is yet another disturbing aspect in this equation. This moist, injected and bacteria-friendly product is frequently labeled as natural and traditional. Some packages declare uncured. They use celery powder instead of sodium nitrite and claim to be healthier and more authentic. This claim does not correspond to reality. Celery powder is simply a concentration of nitrates extracted from vegetables. When the bacteria present in the meat convert these nitrates into nitrites, the chemical result is exactly the same. The only difference is in the label and the price. The consumer pays more for marketing. The medieval farmer did not inject water into his meat. He did exactly the opposite. He extracted every drop of moisture, transforming the meat into something capable of surviving the winter, military sieges, and long sea voyages. His food was designed to last. Ours is designed to expire. To truly understand what happened in those alpine smokehouses, it is necessary to examine the process in detail. What occurred inside that wooden shed over the course of 6 weeks was not primitive. It was sophisticated chemical engineering that worked in harmony with the physical laws of preservation. The process began on the day the pig was slaughtered. The farmer cut the meat into large pieces, hams, bellies, shoulders. In a matter of hours, while the meat was still warm, he covered it with pure, coarse salt, pressing the crystals into every surface. The objective was not to season, it was chemical warfare. Salt works as a weapon. When meat is packed in salt, osmosis begins immediately. The water inside the muscle cells is attracted toward the salt crystals on the surface. The cells shrink. The liquid that escapes carries blood, bacteria, and nutrients that microbes would need to survive. Over the following 7 days, the meat would lose about 15% of its weight, all of this in the form of water draining into the bed of salt below. But here lay the genius of the method. Medieval peoples did not salt only once. After a week, they scraped off the damp and bloody salt and applied fresh, dry salt. They repeated the process again. By the third salting, the meat was firm, dark red in color, and dry to the touch. If we measured the water activity at this point, we would find something around 0.92, low enough to stop most bacteria, but still not safe enough. That is where the smoke came in. The smokehouse was a stone or wood construction with a fire separate from the meat by a long duct or underground channel. The smoke that reached the hanging meat was cold, below 30 degrees Celsius. This detail was critical. Hot smoke would cook the outside, forming a hard crust that would trap moisture inside. Cold smoke did the opposite. It dried the meat slowly, while depositing an invisible army of preservative chemical compounds on every surface. Wood smoke contains more than 200 different compounds. The most important are the phenols and the organic acids. Phenols derive from lignin, the resistant polymer that gives structure to wood. When wood burns at low temperatures, the lignin fragments and releases chemical substances, such as guaiacol and syringol. These phenols are disinfectants. They penetrate the surface of the meat and eliminate bacteria on contact. They also prevent fat from becoming rancid, which is why smoked meat does not develop that sour odor of spoilage, even after months of storage. The organic acids, mainly acetic acid and propionic acid, perform something even more ingenious. They reduce the pH of the meat surface to about 5.0. Bacteria do not survive in acidic environments, but there is an additional mechanism at work. These acids do not just stay on the surface. They are small molecules that cross the bacterial cell wall and penetrate the interior of the cell. Once inside, where the pH is neutral, the acid molecule dissociates and floods the cell with hydrogen ions. The bacterium needs to use all its energy trying to pump these ions out. It exhausts itself and dies. The smoke does not just coat the meat, it transforms the meat into a trap. After 6 weeks, the ham was removed from the smokehouse. It was hard, almost black on the outside, and had lost between 25 and 30% of its original weight. It exhaled an aroma of wood and salt. The farmer wrapped it in cloth, hung it in a cool, dry cellar and left it there. A year later, when he cut that ham, the interior would be dark red, firm, and completely safe for consumption. Only using salt, smoke, and time. This was not a rare or exceptional practice. Monasteries in Germany kept records documenting hams stored for 18 months without any deterioration. Ships crossing the Atlantic in the 1600s carried barrels of salted pork that remained edible throughout the entire journey, 6 months at sea without refrigeration. In 1841, a food inspector in Belfast examined hams imported from Westphalia, a region of Germany. He reported that, after 12 months in a dry cellar, these hams were superior in flavor and preservation to any local product. The method worked because it respected the biology of decomposition. It did not try to deceive bacteria with temporary chemical tricks. It removed what bacteria needed to survive: water, oxygen, and a neutral pH. It was a fortress built of salt and smoke. And once that fortress was complete, the meat became untouchable. To truly understand why these methods worked, it is necessary to descend to the level that most people never see, the molecular level. Bacteria require 3 elements to grow: food, water, and the appropriate environment. Medieval preservation attacked all 3 simultaneously. Let's start with water. Scientists call this water activity. It is a scale from 0 to 1. Pure water corresponds to 1.0. Fresh meat sits around 0.98 or 0.99. This number indicates how much water is free for bacteria to use. When salt is added to meat, something occurs that most people do not understand. The salt does not simply sit there. It dissolves in the water present inside the meat and separates into sodium and chloride ions. These ions attract the water molecules and lock them in position. The water is still present, but it is no longer available. Bacteria cannot access it. Imagine a room full of chairs. If the chairs are empty, people can sit. But if every chair has a coat hanging over it, the room is occupied but unusable. Salt ions are like those coats. They occupy the water molecules. When water activity is reduced below 0.95, we cover enough chairs so that most bacteria cannot find where to settle. They starve to death. But medieval bacon did not stop at 0.95. It went down to 0.85 or less. At this point, even the most resistant bacteria, such as Staphylococcus aureus, can barely function. Fungi do not even start to grow until we reach 0.80. The meat transforms into a biological desert. Now let's add the smoke. When wood burns slowly, it does not just produce flavor, it produces chemistry. One of the main reactions is called pyrolysis. It is when heat breaks down the structure of wood without direct flames. Lignin, the compound that makes wood rigid, fragments into smaller molecules. These molecules are phenols. Phenols are the same chemical compounds used in antiseptic mouthwashes and hospital disinfectants. When phenolic smoke touches the surface of the meat, these molecules do not simply bounce off. They adhere. They react with the surface proteins and form a thin, resistant layer called a pellicle. This pellicle works like a protective plastic film. It retains the remaining moisture and blocks the entry of oxygen and airborne bacteria. But phenols also act internally in the meat. They move through the muscle fibers and bind to fat molecules. Fat normally becomes rancid when it reacts with oxygen. Phenols block this reaction. That is why a 2-year-old ham does not smell like spoiled fat. The smoke neutralizes the chemistry of decomposition even before it can begin. The third layer of defense is the pH. The organic acids in the smoke, mainly acetic acid, the same present in vinegar, reduce the pH of the meat's surface to about 5.0 or less. This matters because bacteria have a comfort zone. Most pathogens prefer a pH between 6.5 and 7.5, close to neutral. When the pH is reduced to 5.0, their enzymes stop working. Their cell membranes are damaged. But the aspect that makes the process lethal is another. Those acid molecules are small. They cross the bacterial cell wall. Once inside the cell, where the pH is neutral, the acid molecules dissociate and release hydrogen ions. The interior of the bacterial cell is flooded with acid. The bacterium spends all its energy trying to pump the acid out. Then it simply exhausts itself and dies. This is known as the hurdle effect or obstacle effect. Each method, salt, smoke, drying, creates a barrier. Alone, each barrier can only slow down bacteria. Together, they create a wall that nothing can cross. Medieval meat did not just resist decomposition. It became chemically programmed to destroy anything that tried to deteriorate it. Modern bacon possesses none of these defenses. The 15 to 25% of added water keeps the water activity dangerously high. The liquid smoke flavor is only sprayed on for taste, not to preserve. There is no protective pellicle, no phenolic barrier, no pH alteration. The meat is soft, moist, and welcoming to bacteria. The only thing that separates modern bacon from complete spoilage is a refrigerator running at 4 degrees and a plastic package. Interrupt the electrical power for 12 hours, and that package of bacon transforms into a biological hazard. If the old method was superior, safer, more durable, and more resistant, why did we abandon it? The answer involves 3 interconnected factors: speed, cost, and the cold chain. After World War II, developed countries needed to feed rapidly growing populations. Meat processors wanted to move products quickly. Traditional curing took 6 to 8 weeks. Slow salting, time-consuming smoking, and careful storage were too slow for industrial scale. So in the 1950s, engineers developed brine injection. Instead of waiting weeks for the salt to naturally diffuse into the meat, they could force it in using needles in a matter of seconds. A machine with 40 needles could inject an entire ham in less than a minute. But injection did something else. It added weight. When a saltwater solution is injected into the meat, the muscle fibers swell. They retain the liquid like a sponge. A 5-kilogram ham could become a 6-kilogram ham overnight. The processor did not lose 25% to drying. They gained 15% in added water. Every kilogram of water sold at the price of meat represented pure profit. The industry loved the discovery, and consumers did not notice, at least not initially. The meat looked plump and fresh. It was only when they cooked it that the truth revealed itself literally. That white liquid draining into the frying pan is not fat. It is the injected water escaping, mixed with dissolved proteins and phosphates. The consumer's money was evaporating before their eyes. Then came the game of labels. In the 1970s, consumers began to worry about nitrites. Studies linked them to cancer when meat was cooked at high temperatures. The industry had a problem. Nitrites prevented botulism and gave bacon its characteristic pink color. Without them, bacon turned gray and potentially dangerous. So instead of removing nitrites, they found a regulatory loophole: celery powder. Celery naturally contains high levels of nitrates. When celery powder is added to meat along with a bacterial starter culture, the bacteria convert the nitrates into nitrites. It is exactly the same chemical substance, exactly the same effect. But because it comes from a vegetable, regulatory bodies allow it to be labeled as uncured and with no added nitrites. Consumers see the word natural and pay more per kilogram. The industry continues using nitrites while charging a premium for hiding them. This is the modern food system in its essence, optimized for profit, added water, exploited loopholes, the illusion of tradition marketed while practicing the opposite. But there is a deeper reason why we abandoned the old methods, the cold chain. In the 1960s and 1970s, refrigeration became cheap and universal. Every truck, every warehouse, every store came to have refrigerators. If it was possible to keep meat cold from slaughter to the table, there was no need to preserve it in any other way. It could be sold moist, fresh, and profitable. Preservation became apparently unnecessary. Except that it was not unnecessary, it was insurance. Medieval peoples preserved meat because they needed to survive the winter, survive wars, survive crop failures. Their foods needed to last. Ours only need to last until the next trip to the supermarket. We traded resilience for convenience. And now when the power goes out or the supply chain is interrupted, our foods die in days. So what can be done about it? There are essentially three paths. Find truly preserved meat, make it yourself, or at least learn to recognize the frauds. First, find the authentic product. Look for products labeled as country ham or dry cured. These are closer to the medieval method. They are salted, matured, and sometimes smoked without injection. They will be hard, dark, and expensive. A genuine, traditionally cured ham costs more per kilogram than supermarket ham, but it is not full of water. You are paying for meat, not for tap water with a profit margin. Specifically, check for the expression dry cured. Wet cured means it was dipped or injected. Dry cured means it was covered in salt and matured. If the package mentions added water anywhere in the list of ingredients, put it back. You would be buying a sponge. Second, it is possible to do it yourself. It is not as hard as it seems. Three things are necessary: salt, time, and patience. Start with a pork belly. Weigh it. Use 2% of that weight in salt. For a belly of approximately 2 kilograms, that represents about 40 grams of salt. Mix the salt with a small amount of curing salt, also called pink salt or Prague powder number 1. This contains sodium nitrite and prevents botulism. It can be acquired online. It is not optional if you are curing at home. Rub the salt mixture over the entire surface of the meat. Place it in a non-reactive container, glass or food-grade plastic. Place it in the refrigerator. Every 2 days, turn the piece and drain any liquid that accumulates. After 7 days, rinse the meat in cold water and dry with paper towels. Now let it dry. Wrap it in cheesecloth and hang it in a cool, dry place. A cellar, an extra refrigerator with the door slightly ajar, anywhere between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius. Let it hang for 2 to 4 weeks. The meat will lose 15 to 20% of its weight. It will become firm. The fat will become slightly translucent. If you want to smoke it, apply cold smoking for 8 to 12 hours using hardwood such as oak or hickory. Keep the temperature below 25 degrees. When finished, the bacon will be hard, dark, and completely different from supermarket bacon. It will last for months in the refrigerator, or weeks at room temperature if kept dry. Cut into thin slices. The flavor is intense, salty, smoky, concentrated. This is what bacon was for 1,000 years before we decided to add water and call it progress. Third, learn to identify the frauds. If your bacon releases white liquid when you cook it, it was injected. If it shrinks more than 10% in the pan, it was inflated with water. If it says uncured but lists celery powder in the ingredients, it still contains nitrites. You are being deceived with a vegetable. The medieval farmer with his smokehouse was not a primitive. He was an engineer who understood that food is chemistry. He knew that water is the enemy of preservation. He knew that smoke is medicine. He knew that time, not shortcuts, creates safety. We forgot this. We traded his fortress for a cold chain and called it improvement. But when the power goes out, when the trucks stop running, when the supermarket shelves empty, his bacon would still be hanging in the cellar, safe and ready for consumption. Ours would be rotting in a plastic bag. The history of meat preservation is not just a historical curiosity. It is a mirror that reflects our choices as a society. We opted for speed over quality, for profit over health, for convenience over resilience. Modern bacon, with its added water and its misleading labels, is a symbol of this trade-off. But it is also a reminder that ancestral knowledge was not primitive, it was deeply sophisticated. Our ancestors did not have laboratories or microscopes, but they developed through centuries of observation and experimentation methods that modern science only confirms as effective. The secret of meat that lasts is not in a laboratory or in a factory. It is in salt, in smoke, and in the patience of letting chemistry do its work. Medieval bacon was food designed to survive. Ours is designed to sell. The choice in the end belongs to each of us. If this journey through time and the science of meat preservation brought new perspectives to you, consider leaving your comment sharing what surprised you most in this story. Perhaps you have memories of grandparents or great-grandparents who still made cured meats in the traditional way. Or perhaps you have been inspired to try the process at home. Whatever your experience, your participation enriches the conversation. If this content added value to your day, a simple gesture like liking the video and subscribing to the channel helps us continue bringing documentary narratives like this one, rescuing knowledge that the haste of the modern world left behind. Together, we can continue unearthing what was forgotten and restoring the connection between the past and the present, one story at a time.